The alien scholar mocked an ancient relic. The human whispered, "That's our scripture." Dr. Zexthan's four eyes gleamed with academic superiority as he gestured dismissively at the weathered artifact displayed in the Galactic Museum's Primitive Cultures Wing. The object was unremarkable by most standards, a collection of bound organic material, its surface worn smooth by countless hands, its edges frayed from age and use. "Observe, class," the Velthari professor announced to his group of graduate students, his crystalline voice carrying the unmistakable tone of intellectual condescension. "Here we have yet another example of pre-spaceflight superstition. Notice the crude binding methods, the primitive writing system, the complete lack of quantum-encrypted data storage." The students, a mix of species from across the Confederation, nodded knowingly. They had seen dozens of such relics during their tour: prayer wheels from the Centauri monks, crystal matrices from the silicon-based Kepler colonies, stone tablets from the volcanic world of Pyros IV, all curious footnotes in the grand march of galactic civilization. "The species that created this," Zexthan continued, his secondary arms waving expressively, "clearly invested enormous emotional energy into these physical objects, quite touching, really, in a quaint sort of way. Imagine, actually believing, that meaning could be contained within mere matter." A few students chuckled at the professor's wit. The Velthari were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced philosophy and their ability to store consciousness in quantum matrices. To them, the idea of finding spiritual significance in physical objects seemed almost charmingly backwards. "Professor," one student asked, "what civilization created this particular relic?" "Ah, yes," Zexthan replied, consulting his neural implant. "This comes from a recently contacted species called humans. They've just achieved basic interstellar travel. Quite promising, actually. Their engineers show remarkable intuitive grasp of fusion dynamics. But as you can see from this display, their cultural development has been, shall we say, rather stunted by primitive mysticism." At the edge of the group, unnoticed by the professor, stood a figure in the simple brown robes worn by many galactic pilgrims. The figure had remained silent throughout the tour, but now stepped closer to examine the artifact more carefully. Zexthan noticed the movement and seized the opportunity for further demonstration. "Ah, we have an observer. Tell me, Pilgrim, what do you make of this crude attempt at preserving sacred knowledge?" The robed figure was quiet for a long moment, studying the worn leather cover, the gilded letters that had faded but not disappeared, the careful way the museum had positioned it to show both its age and its obvious importance to those who had once owned it. "It's beautiful," the figure said softly. Zexthan's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Beautiful? My dear primitive, surely you can appreciate the aesthetic superiority of proper information storage. This deteriorating organic matter will crumble to dust in a few hundred years. Our quantum matrices preserve knowledge for millennia without degradation. What could possibly be beautiful about such impermanence?" The pilgrim's hood fell back, revealing a distinctly human face, weathered but kind, with eyes that held depths the professor couldn't quite fathom. "The impermanence is part of its beauty," the human said quietly. "Every mark on that cover represents someone who held it when they needed hope. Every worn edge shows where desperate fingers traced familiar words in dark times." "Sentiment," Zexthan dismissed. "Surely you don't believe the superstitions contained within actually have any validity?" The human stepped closer to the display case. "Professor, may I ask what your species considers sacred?" "Sacred?" Zexthan's tone grew pedantic. "We Velthari have evolved beyond such primitive concepts. We deal in measurable realities, quantum mechanics, dimensional mathematics, empirical truth. We don't require fairy tales to explain existence." "And yet," the human observed gently, "you travel across the galaxy to study the fairy tales of other species. You preserve them in museums. You spend your lives teaching about them. That seems rather reverent for meaningless superstition." Several students shifted uncomfortably. The human's logic was uncomfortably sound. Zexthan's four eyes narrowed. We study primitive cultures for historical context, nothing more. Academic curiosity about the evolutionary phases of intelligent development. The human nodded thoughtfully, then pointed to the artifact. That book has survived longer than most civilizations. It's been translated into thousands of languages, crossed more space than your quantum matrices, and shaped more lives than any technology ever invented. For 2,000 years, humans have found strength, comfort, wisdom, and hope within those pages. Delusion. Sexton snorted. Mass psychological conditioning. Perhaps, the human conceded. But when human soldiers were dying in trenches, they clutched those words. When human mothers lost children, they found solace in those promises. When human scientists made their greatest discoveries, they credited the moral framework those teachings provided. When humans first reached for the stars, they carried those principles with them. The professor waved dismissively. Emotional crutches for an emotionally primitive species. The human smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed both sadness and infinite patience. Professor, your species stores consciousness in quantum matrices because you fear death. You travel the galaxy seeking knowledge because you fear ignorance. You teach because you fear being forgotten. How exactly are those motivations different from ours? Silence fell over the group. Sexton's crystalline voice had lost its confident ring. The human continued quietly. That book taught us that love is stronger than hate, that hope survives, despair that every consciousness, human, Velthari, or otherwise, has inherent worth. It taught us to care for the weak, to seek justice, to forgive enemies. Those aren't primitive concepts, Professor. They're the foundations that allowed us to join you out here among the stars. You speak as if, Sexton began, then stopped. The human's eyes never left the display case. That's our scripture, Professor. And every word of it still burns as bright as the day it was written. For the first time in his academic career, Dr. Sexton found himself genuinely speechless. Around the display case, beings from a dozen worlds stood in contemplative silence, each perhaps reconsidering what they thought they knew about wisdom, about faith, and about the strange, resilient species called humanity. The worn book continued, its vigil behind the protective glass patient and enduring, its message unchanged by the passing of millennia or the opinions of scholars, a testament to the power of words that refused to be reduced to mere matter and the unquenchable human spirit that had carried them to the stars.